Hey, my friend, this is Pastor Mike, and here I am at the North Market. To me, one of the greatest places here in Columbus. It's a gem in our city. It's a place to me of discovery, of curiosity, and of adventure. Adventure in that sense that there's a zip line inside, but the adventure of food, of eating. And when you walk in, there are smells that excite our senses, and there's things to discover from local vendors. It's a great place to take family and friends. I'm sure you've done the same. I know for us, when our boys were in school, when they had the day off, we'd come down here for lunch and we'd give them each $10 and said, all right guys, you need to find something you normally don't eat. Not a hamburger, you always get a hamburger, or a donut, you always get donuts. But get something that you've never had before. Let it be an adventure of eating. And they always came back with something unique that we all got a chance to taste. Marketplaces around the world, in every city, are places where people gather to discover and to find new things for their lives. And so what if a marketplace was also a place where people discovered God, that it was a sacred space, that God uses even a marketplace to introduce people to Christ? So we do know that God can use any place, a place like a marketplace, a place like North Market, as a sacred space in which the gospel is shared. That God does send his church out to preach the gospel wherever we are. It goes back to Acts chapter 8, verse 4, which is the primary focus of our series this month, that the church was scattered in the first century and they preached the gospel wherever they went. And where we are too, the church has been scattered. We're not in our church buildings right now. We've been scattered, and we preach the gospel wherever we go, including a place like the North Market. That there's not this false divide of a secular space and a sacred space. That God's only talked about in sacred spaces and not talked about in secular spaces. God doesn't care about that divide, because no matter where we are, God is. Because God dwells within us. We are ambassadors for Christ wherever we go. That God's love flows through us wherever we are. And when that happens, wherever we are, God is, it becomes a sacred space. A place like a marketplace, a baseball diamond, a business, a home. And so wherever we are, we preach the gospel. And we discover in Acts chapter 17, verse 17, that Paul was in Athens. And he was in the synagogue, a sacred space, it says in verse 17, reasoning with the Jewish people there and the God-fearing Greeks about the gospel. But he also went to what we call a secular space, the marketplace. And it says that he went to the marketplace day by day, and he reasoned with those who happened to be there. He reasoned with the gospel with those who happened to be there. And so what can we learn from Paul as we seek to do the same, to preach the gospel wherever we are? Well, here's an important point. He goes to that place day by day. He's becoming a regular in the marketplace. And he's talking with people who happen to be there, which indicates that just like any marketplace, people come and go from marketplaces. People happen to show up and then they leave. But Paul became this regular where he shows up day after day, even though there's different people coming and going, and he's interacting with people, whoever happen to be there. He's trusting that God is setting up serendipitous encounters for him, preparing hearts and minds to hear what he has to say about Jesus crucified and risen. He's there day after day. And think about what that day after day also does. The day after day develops trust. It becomes a pathway for him sharing the gospel with people. That he's earning the right to share the gospel because he's there day after day. That consistency leads into his trustworthiness, which opens the door to share the gospel. And he's doing what Jesus did. I mean, N.T. Wright, a theologian from England, pointed out that Jesus earned trust with people before he shared his life publicly with us as Messiah. Think about his ministry in the Gospels that are recorded happen when he's 30 years old. There's 30 years of things we don't know about Jesus. But that 30 years of unseen work is the day after dayness of Jesus showing up in the village, developing trust with other people, knowing and being known by other people. He developing trust with his integrity. In the first century, N.T. Wright points out in a great way, he says, think about this. Those are places where villages were and towns were. And in that area of the Sea of Galilee where Jesus lived, he probably knew the majority of the people, and the majority of people knew him, because that's the way things were those days. You knew each other, and you couldn't lie. You couldn't cheat people, because your reputation is on the line, because you have your currency, for lack of a better term, your currency for your business or for your life is your trustworthiness in the first century. So Jesus, over a 30-year period, had to develop trust day after day after day before his public ministry began, so that when he began to teach, people will listen because they already know he's trustworthy. He's earned the right to share the gospel. And so, yeah, people might disagree with him and push back on him, but there's a sense that there's a deeper sense of who Jesus is. They know that they're leaning into because he's trustworthy in the way he is. His love is trustworthy. His integrity is trustworthy. They can count on what he's saying, which indirectly then adds validity to the Gospels. That the disciples were that same way. They lived in those places day after day after day. They weren't foreigners coming in. They lived there. And what they wrote down is trustworthy in the sense that it had to be. If they lied, people would call them on it because they knew them. And that's the way they would do with Jesus as well. So Paul is doing that. Paul is developing trust day after day after day. That consistency is earning the right for him to, when he meets people, to share the gospel with them, certainly through loving action and kindness and grace, but also through verbal communication by sharing the gospel that Jesus is crucified and risen. It's an important point. So where does God send you day after day? Where is God sending you so that you can develop the trust to share the gospel with those around you? Coworkers, people that you play on a sports team with, or you coach a team, you show up day after day. Those are places where God is using you to be an ambassador. And for a long time, you might not share the gospel verbally, but you were sharing the gospel through your actions, through your kindness, through the grace of God flowing through you. So for example, as you might recall from an earlier sermon this summer, I spent a lot of time on the baseball diamond this year helping to coach my son's baseball team. And I did it for two reasons. One, I did it because I love baseball and I love coaching. I love hanging out with my son and seeing him succeed, seeing his fellow players succeed, seeing our team succeed. I love helping invest time into this team and these players, the skills, the mental side of baseball, so that these guys succeed on the field, but also off the field as well. That's why I coached. But there was also a sense that I knew that God was using me as an ambassador in those places, on that baseball diamond, to develop trust with these young people, develop trust with my other coaches and other parents, so that when the opportunity presented itself, I could share the gospel with them. And so it did happen twice. We went to Myrtle Beach on a baseball trip for a baseball tournament, and there was a moment halfway through the week where I was able to share the gospel with these young men, 16 to 17-year-old young men. When they asked, they were curious about what I did as a pastor, and they had questions about God, and we talked about Jesus and the reality of Jesus. And so, but that had to come halfway through the season, halfway through that week. I had to earn the right for that to happen. And then just this week, one of our coaches, one of his best friends is dying, and his best friend doesn't have a connection to a church. And so my fellow coach knows I'm a pastor, so he invited me and he asked me if I could come and pray with his friend before he passes. And so I had the privilege and the honor of sharing the gospel with this man as he's dying, with his friends that were there, Now, this man is already a Christian, but I couldn't tell that everybody else in the room was a Christian. But God used me in that moment because I had developed some relationships and some trust with these people, so that when the need arises, the need arose, that God could use me to share the gospel through prayer and through spoken word with the man who was dying, with our fellow coach, and with this man's friends who were gathered there as well. And so God uses all of us, not just a pastor like me, but every single one of us, day after day, wherever we are. God uses us to share the gospel in those places. So in a very real sense, Paul became a guide to people he talked to, helping them discover a new reality, that this unknown God that they worshiped can be known in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. That this Jesus is the Messiah who's come, and he's inviting them into relationship with him. And you might be saying right now, man, Pastor Mike, that's offensive, especially today, because it's offensive to share the gospel with people. People don't like it. And, in the end of the day, aren't all religions the same? Aren't they all the same? And why share the gospel when they're all the same? And I would say this. Let me ask you this. Is all ice cream the same? Is all ice cream the same? Is Dairy Queen ice cream the same as Grater's ice cream, the same as Jenny's ice cream? Are they all the same? And you would inherently answer, no, they're not all the same. Yes, they're made out of similar things or the same ingredients, but not all ice cream is the same. If we said that we would be lying if that was the case. But we do know that there's some ice cream that is better than others. And there's some ice cream that is unique, more unique than others. For example, I've got some Jenny's ice cream right here. And I have the flavor of goat cheese and red cherries. It's delicious. Here's the thing with that. Dairy Queen is not going to have goat cheese and red cherries. Grater's might have that, but Jenny's certainly has that. And you know about Jenny's, if you've been there, it's full of so many unique flavors that are put together in ice cream. And when you come to North Market, or you go to Short North or other places, or Easton, where Jenny's is, you go, man, we got to go there because there's unique flavors, specific flavors of ice cream that you can't get anywhere else. You have to go to Jenny's. We become ambassadors for Jenny's ice cream. And isn't that right and true and good to do so? Because we enjoy it and we find value in it. Doesn't it make sense that I would say, man, you got to try this goat cheese and red cherries ice cream. Oh my gosh. Now, somebody might say, well, I'm allergic to goat cheese. Well, you don't have to have that. There's so many other flavors of Jenny's ice cream. So the specificity of the ice cream is not offensive. It's simply a way of saying there's uniqueness here. And what Paul was doing, he was saying, look, you are worshiping an unknown God. Well, I got great news for you. This unknown God can be known. Because Jesus was crucified, yes, but he also rose from the dead. He's here right now with us. Yes, it's specific. That is, Jesus is specific. He's different than Muhammad. He's different than Buddha. He's different than any Hindu god. Jesus is not the same, and no religion is the same. That's a false. It's not true. There's some similarities between, but there's a lot of differences as well. And just because it's specific doesn't make it wrong. So Jesus being crucified and risen from the dead is a unique message among all other messages in the world. And you and I are ambassadors of it. So what's interesting is that Paul doesn't argue with these people. It says that he reasoned with them. Now, one translation in verse 17 says that he argued with the Jewish people in the synagogue and the God-fearing Greeks and those in the marketplace. But arguing is not the right translation of that word. So in the first century Greek version of Acts chapter 17, the word used that Paul was doing, it says dialectico. In other words, he was dialoguing with these people. And what happens when we dialogue with people? We share power. We share a conversation. We share ideas with one another. And we find a shared meaning with one another when we dialogue with them. I mean, sharing the gospel is not an argument of you're right and I'm right and you're wrong and all these things. It's more about engaging in a relationship, engaging a conversation based on reason and what's true and what do we know and what do we know to be true. That's what sharing the gospel is. It's a dialogue with people that God sets up serendipitously, that God's already doing something in their heart, and we show up and we share the gospel honestly, truthfully, with our words and our actions because we develop some trust with them, and we do so in a respectful way. Notice how respectful Paul is with those God-fearing Greeks, those philosophers, those Epicureans, those Stoics. He didn't condemn them. Matter of fact, he honored them by saying, here's what I know about you. You worship a God and you have this phrase, in him we move and have our being. Well, I got great news for you, Paul says. This God who is not known by you can be known in Jesus. And they were so taken by this idea, they invited him to go to the Areopagus. And that's when he shared the gospel even further, the Areopagus, where this public gathering was. But notice at first, they were pushing back on Paul, saying, I mean, what's this babbler saying? He's advocating foreign gods, they said. It's like this. I say, oh, you got to try the goat cheese and red cherries ice cream from Grater's, or not Grater's, either red cherries and goat cheese ice cream from Jenny's. And you go, goat cheese and red cherries, and you push back on it. And I'm like, no, just hold on a second. You got to taste it. Like, I'm not offended if you push back on the reality that is goat cheese and red cherries and ice cream. By no means. I'm going to invite you further into at least taking a taste. And that's what Paul did. He respectfully said, I know you're pushing back on it. It doesn't make sense right now. But let me talk to you further. And they invited him to the Areopagus, where he could share further about the story of the gospel, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. And my friends, that's what you and I do too. We are called and sent out as ambassadors for Christ wherever we go. And as I said, wherever we go, day after day, we earn the right with people around us to gain trust so that when the opportunity to share the gospel is presented, we do so in a dialogue, in a respectful, caring, grace-filled, compassionate, and truthful way. My friends, in the end of the day, we're all like Paul. We're sent out to preach the gospel wherever we go, whether it be on a soccer pitch, a baseball diamond, our businesses, in our homes, or even a place like North Market. Wherever we are, day by day, we share the goodness of God with others through our words and our actions. We're ambassadors for Christ wherever we go because Christ lives within us. And because Christ lives within us, God's grace and kindness overflows to bless others through our words and our actions. So my friend, go as Jesus said, go into the world. Wherever you go and make disciples of all nations. And as you do so, may you be filled with wisdom and insight and God's grace and God's goodness to bless others around you. Let's do that together. And right now, I'm going to go back inside and get some Indian food. It smells delicious.